Hi everyone, welcome to Book Talks with Miss Thomas. If you're new here, please subscribe, and if you're returning, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. So this is another Philippians 4 video where I am trying to create a list of appropriate books for the young adult reader. Now this one is Christian mystery, so some of them are more for the adult, the older adult. So I think what I would do is put content warnings on these books if I were going to put them in a library, because I do think that they are appropriate for high school students, but not younger than high school students. And even then, you would need to be a mature and discerning reader. So let's get to the list. Now, the first book on the list is One Little Lie by Colleen Coble. As you know, I love that book. I did that book as a giveaway. And one thing I really like about that book is that it's the first in a series. So if you like the book, you get to read more for those characters and that storyline. And so I really enjoyed it. It does begin, so you know right away. That's one thing about the Colleen Coble books that I've read. I've only read, I think, 3, but you know right away what you're getting into, because it starts with, it's a cult, and there's this teenage girl, and she's pregnant, and she's about to go into labor. Then she's giving birth, and then there's some sort of dramatic thing breaks out. I think it's sounded like a fire, but actually I think it was a raid from the FBI or the police. She escapes the cult with her father, but the baby is left behind, and her father tells her the baby died. And so that's the title, One Little Lie. And then you flash forward many years later, and she is this police detective, and her father is a retired police detective. And there's this man, and he's divorced, and he's got this teenage son, and they are new in town, while this woman that was in the cult and is now an adult police detective is investigating some murders. And so the two, the recently divorced father and the police detective, they end up working together, and they have an interesting relationship. And of course, the woman, the detective, she has a unique interest in his son, because she, has such deep feelings of loss over the baby that she believes she lost when she escaped that cult. And so it had a little bit of everything. It had a lot of characters that were well developed. It had mystery. It had possible romance, and it was just a great book all around. So I love Colleen Coble. I think you can't go wrong with her. But you need to know going in that you may see some things that are not... there may be some content warnings. There may be violence. There may be some sort of cult. I'm going to go into the next one by Colleen Coble, so you know what I mean. Beneath Cooper Falls. I also reviewed that in a separate video. Again, the book begins with this woman who makes dinner for her fiance, and he flies into a rage because she cooked something that he didn't like. And so he took her head and forced it into the kitchen sink and murdered her. He drowned her by forcing her head into the kitchen sink. And it's described, pretty clearly. So right away, first passage, you're like, ow. And when I read that, I thought, oh, I don't know about this, because this was my first Colleen Coble book. And so I wasn't sure. And I did stick it out, and I'm so glad I did, because really the very first passage in the book was the most upsetting. And then it just gets into the murder mystery. And so the man who murdered his fiance, he is apparently a serial killer. And then you get into the detective who's looking, I don't know if it was a detective. It's been a while since I've read that one, but people are looking for the serial killer. And meanwhile, there's this woman who is running away from her abusive boyfriend and moves in with her brother. And so she's trying to start over in this new place, in this home that her brother is allowing her to live in, because he travels a lot. And so there's like a dual plot there. There's the girl that's running from the boyfriend, and then there's the serial killer. And there's also some stuff about dogs, because they train dogs to be rescue dogs in the book. And so if you're a dog lover, I don't know what it is about mystery writers, Christian mystery writers, and dogs, but Colleen Coble has cute little dog in that book. And I know that Carrie Stewart Parks has some dogs mentioned pretty often in her books. So let me move into Carrie Stewart Parks. Now, Carrie Stewart Parks' Fragments of Fear is still the best Christian book I have ever read. Like, definitely my favorite Christian book, no hesitation, Fragments of Fear by Carrie Stewart Parks. And I like that one because there's like a psychological thriller aspect to it. So there's a sort of sense of gaslighting. So the main character, I think her name would be pronounced Tavish, and she's a painter. And she is burying her fiance. She's at his funeral. He has died. And this other woman shows up and says that was, I can't remember if it was her boyfriend or her fiance or what, but it was just, what's up with the fiance? You know, did he have a secret life? We don't know. And then this dog has disappeared. These people from the shelter, the animal shelter, call Tavish and say, we have your dog. And she says, I don't have a dog. And they say, sure you do. It says here that you're the owner. You need to get this dog or we're going to put the dog down. And she's grieving from, just going to a funeral. She doesn't want to be responsible for the death of some dog. So she goes to get the dog and try and figure out the situation when, she recognizes the dog. It's not her dog, but she is a painter. And so she painted a portrait of a man and this dog. So she knows who the dog is. She knows the owner of the dog. So she goes to take the dog. She gets the dog from the shelter, and she goes to take the dog to the man when she finds the man brutally murdered in his house, just brutally murdered. And there's just, it's an awful scene. Now, of course, there's description of blood and things like that, but the man's already been murdered. So there's no, violence of a person that we, I'm not good with that. So that we're spared. But the scene is described. And so she gets in her car to drive away, and then she comes back and the scene's completely cleaned up, like really, really cleaned up. And she sees the police car. I think she sees the police officers putting the body in the trunk. So what's that about? It's just a lot of, but it was just, I loved about the book. I loved the psychological aspect of 1 minute there's a murder scene, and then there's this immaculate house and nobody recognizes, what she's trying to say. She saw a man was murdered and who's going to believe her. And so there was a lot of that in the book. And I just thought it was really, really good. And I loved that. There was a little bit of romance again in the book, but not over the top. I'm not big on that, lovey-dovey, the heaving. There was no heaving, but it was good. It was really good. And then another one by Carrie Stewart Parks. I have my computer over here and I keep tapping it because it goes blank. But another one by Carrie Stewart Parks is Relative Silence, which again, I've recommended in another video. It's a story of a girl who is in a restaurant. She's very wealthy. Her family's wealthy. She's got this politician brother, and she's in a restaurant and an active shooter just opens fire. And she survives. And from there, we find there's all this tragedy and, was the shooter trying to shoot her? If so, why? And then we find out that her daughter died when the daughter was a toddler in a boating accident. And that seems to be connected to the present. And so there is a little bit of, I don't want to say dual timeline because it's all her lifetime, but there's the past and the present woven together. And it's a great mystery. And there's a lot of creepy family dynamic, the rich, creepy people. There's a lot of that. The main character was not creepy. You really rooted for her, but you weren't so sure. I wasn't so sure about her family. So I liked that book. I liked the characters. I liked wondering who I could and could not trust. Okay. Again, I have, while I'm on Carrie Stewart Parks, I'll just mention Woman in Shadow. I did a video on that one. And I also did read Fallout. Those are fine. There's nothing objectionable in those. I love Carrie Stewart Parks. Woman in Shadow and Fallout are, I'll have to put it on here. Clan Fernan, I think. It's like it's a place where these FBI or detective people go when they have post-traumatic stress disorder, and they've had some sort of tragedy in their life, and they're going here to rehabilitate, and then they get mixed up in mysteries as they are trying to re-enter, the world after suffering post-traumatic stress. And so those were great books where a detective stumbles upon or is sent to a mystery situation and resolves it. They were really good. Fragments of Fear was my favorite, but they, of course, were very good and nothing objectionable. They are murder mysteries, so there's going to be some violence, but not overly depicted, over the top. And they are Christian. Carrie Stewart Parks, references scripture. These Clan Fernan detectives, they carry around scripture on rocks. I think one is Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans for you, declares the Lord. I don't know if each character in those books has different scriptures, but there's definitely a biblical faith content. Okay, Fatal Mistake by Susan Sleeman is one of the very, very first Philippian 4 mystery books that I read. And I believe that one was the White Knight series. Yes, the White Knight series. And this woman stumbles across materials to make a bomb, and the FBI is looking for a bomber. And come to find out, she knows this bomber, and he's got this creepy obsession with her. So she's on the run from him. And then the man that she called, I think it was the FBI. Yeah, the FBI hotline. The man from the FBI hotline is trying to catch up to her, to protect her. And she just doesn't know who to trust. And so that was a really good action-packed mystery with, again, a pinch of romance. The Reckoning at Gossamer Pond is my very first Jo Wright book. I loved it. I absolutely loved that book. I highly recommend it. I struggled with, do I want to recommend this book for young adult Christian readers or not? I would, if it were my child and my teenage child, I would say, here you go, you can read this. But I would want to have some conversations, about it, because it's about this girl, and she goes to, she's living in this house when this man moves in next door. And come to find out, the man is her sweetheart from high school, and he broke her heart. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers or anything, but I do need to tell you, if you're thinking about recommending this book to a teenager, later in the story, we find out that they had a baby together, and she gave the baby up for adoption, and that's why their relationship ended, because, the parents broke that up. And there's some hurt feelings there because she feels like he abandoned her. But they did give the child up for adoption, and they lived godly lives. They were just, teenagers who took it too far and paid for it, certainly. But I still think that it is a valid story, because the teenage relationship was not glorified or condoned. It was presented for what it was. She got pregnant, and the relationship ended sadly. And then they have to sort of work together because they live next door to each other. They sort of have to build back some sort of trust relationship there. So that was one aspect of the book. And again, that's sort of spoilerish, and I apologize, but because I'm talking about recommending books to young adults, I felt like that was something that needs to be out there in the open and discussed if you're going to give this book to a teenager. But there was a lot in that book that I really loved and highly recommend. And actually, I loved the teenage romance aspect too, because it was presented pretty honestly. It wasn't glorified, but it wasn't, like shame, shame, shame either, because we're all redeemed and we're all far from perfect. And then there's also some dual timeline. Back in a previous time, years ago, there's a plot line where this man is found and he is hanging. So it appears that he hanged himself, but maybe he was killed. And so there's a mystery there. And there's also these what do you call it? You know, like the tent in the center of town, the evangelicals. There's these evangelical brothers. They're like traveling preachers, and they go around and they preach at this this like tent in the center of town. And there's a lot of upheaval. A lot of people are really offended and upset by the things that they're preaching. And so there's a lot of drama in the town. And there's one of the guys, one of the two brothers that preach. There's just something a little bit off that makes the woman who found the man hanging, she's really uncomfortable around him, and he seems unusually interested in her. And so there's just kind of a creepy thing there. And I just loved The Reckoning at Gossamer Pond. There was a lot about redemption, about making mistakes, having your heart broken, and having to rebuild. And I loved the scenes, you know, from back in the day when there was the tent in the center of town. I'm sorry, my mind goes to that song by Sarah Groves, There's a Tent in the Center of Town. I'm not even on key, but I loved that aspect of the story. Finally, the last one that I have to share with you in this particular video is the If I Run by Terri Blackstock series. Now, I read the middle one. Which one did I read? Let me check. If I Run. So there's a 3-book series. This woman, she stumbles upon her best friend who's been murdered, and she is assumed to be the killer. And so she's on the run because everyone thinks that she killed this man when really he's her friend, and she wants to find the killer. And I guess one of the people that has been hired to track her down, he starts to recognize her innocence. And so there's a unique relationship there because they bump into each other sometimes, and then she evades him. And I don't know, I'm not sure how much of that is, I hope I didn't give anything away because I read the second one. I didn't read the first one. But there are 3 books about this girl who is on the run because people think that she killed her best friend. And while she's on the run, at least in the book I read, she stumbles upon a different mystery. And so she's trying to solve a mystery while she's running from her own mystery. So If I Run by Terri Blackstock, I think there's If I Stay and If I Live. I'm not sure. People love Terri Blackstock. I just wasn't that impressed, but it was just the one book and it was in the middle. A friend of mine read them all and she said, oh, you have to try the last one. The last one you'll definitely like. So, you know, in all fairness, I'm putting Terri Blackstock on the list because I hear wonderful things about her. For whatever reason, I just didn't quite connect. I have another book by her that is not in that series that I have not yet read, but I will read. So that one is called Predator. So I don't know anything about the book, but I'm going to read that one and I'll review that one eventually. And then there's Criss by CeCe Warrens, which I have not read. And that's about a girl who I think is being stalked, and it's supposed to be kind of a creepy horror. I heard from Stacy, Christian Reads and Classics. She recommended that book. She said it was really scary, but it was a Christian book. So I'm going to put that one out there. Haven't read it yet, but I will, and I will review it when I do. So those are my Christian mysteries that I'm recommending. I am putting them on my Philippian 4 list for the teenage reader, but with content warnings. And definitely, anytime you're reading a book and you're giving it to somebody else who's younger or more impressionable, I would absolutely urge you to read it alongside them and discuss it with them, because it's just fun to discuss books, but also it's good to really know what's in them. And sometimes the things in books can open us up to those conversations that we might not otherwise have. And I definitely think some of those conversations need to occur as a mom of a middle schooler and a grown boy. These are definitely conversations that are uncomfortable, but I feel need to happen sometimes. So a book is a great opportunity to do that. You know, if you're reading it alongside with somebody and you can discuss it in a responsible and respectful way. Otherwise, maybe you just want to read it for yourself because you're looking for a good mystery. I recommend these. So thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, because I would love for you to come back and hear my next list of recommendations. Bye-bye.